It's time for Community Matters on News Talk WRAK. Here's your host, Ted Saul.
Well, good afternoon and welcome into Community Matters. And we have an interview today with Zach Fortier, and he is the award-winning author of numerous books, of true crime books that really tell it like it is. And first of all, Zach, I want to say good afternoon and welcome into Community Matters. Your police career is so fascinating to me. It began in the time of the military. Did you want to do that early in your life, or is it something that came later in your life?
Well, basically, it was kind of a realization I had at about 18, 19 years old. I've always had a problem with authority, and just kind of, I don't know, I guess an epiphany or whatever, that, it was better to be an authority figure than to be subjected to an authority figure.
Zach, what was it like where you grew up?
It's pretty much a blue-collar town. It was kind of rough. We lived in the inner city that I ended up working in, and, it was just kind of, it wasn't like South Central Los Angeles, but it was tough.
And how about your parents? How were they? Were they effective in raising you?
I think if anybody's read my books knows I don't really pull any punches with my parents. It's not that I don't love them, but they had absolutely no idea how to parent. They had no idea how to discipline, and to be quite honest, they were abusive and brutal.
Did you have any other brothers and sisters?
Yeah, I got an older brother, and he was a cop. We both worked for the same department.
Did you ever try to figure out what it was that brought you both to the same careers in life?
I really think that just that, the lack of justice at home, the lack of feeling safe, the lack of understanding that if you did this, this was a consequence, whatever. My parents, whenever we did anything wrong, we'd get random consequences. Sometimes you get absolutely no consequence, and then another time you get just beat. And there was no sense of justice or any normalcy to anything that happened. You just were always on edge. That brought us both into law enforcement to try to bring some peace to that part of our lives.
And as you look back at it now, would you feel that you achieved that?
Absolutely not. No. If anything, it made it worse. There's just so much chaos and violence, and the criminal justice system really is nothing about justice. It's about a very black and white set of laws, and what's right is not always the outcome.
And it's interesting, too, I guess, because when you have a situation where people control it and their views get in the way of what justice should or should not be, that always seems to be where we end up going. And it just seems like, for example, in Washington with the Supreme Court, you have a certain amount of people that make decisions that affect all of us. And I always wondered about that, especially what their political views are, et cetera.
Yeah.
How's that make you feel?
I think, the Supreme Court's been a pretty effective tool. It works. I just think people don't understand the concept behind it. They search for cases that have very specific aspects to them that will be able to address whatever law or whatever outcome they're looking for. So they don't just take any case. They look for very specific cases. And like they recently turned down looking at a gay marriage law.
Yeah.
It's because the aspects of that case don't fit what they want to address. They wait for the case to come that fit all the, I can't remember the exact legal term, but all the parts that they're looking for to make this into a law or to address whether it shouldn't be a law. It's not that they personally feel gay marriage is one way or the other. That's not their job.
I agree with that. Well, let's talk about you first of all. All right, so you got to the point in your life where you grew up and you had a rough childhood, and you probably couldn't wait till you were able to leave school and then take off and start your career. You wanted to follow the military route. What brought that about in your life? What made you wanted to go in the direction of military, to be an MP?
Basically, I just wanted to get out of where I was. I wanted to be on my own. I wanted to be away from where I was. I didn't want anything to do with the city or the state or the people. I had no intention of coming back. The military was a good way to accomplish that. You get a job and you're gone. And there were no jobs in the 80s. I don't know if you remember, but back then there were just no jobs. I looked forever to get a job. As an 18-year-old kid coming out of high school, you have no skills. The military was a great place to go.
Yeah, I can remember like right around the Jimmy Carter era where there were lines for people to get gasoline because it was just a very difficult time. And then, another thing too, Zach, was the way that people in the community would look at folks in the military. I think they were still trying to heal from that Vietnam era. Do you believe that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was very much. Going in the military was not perceived as a positive thing, and people did not want to talk to you. I remember asking girls out to go on a date. I mean, just to go on a date, and they absolutely would have nothing to do with you. And today, it's a 180. I mean, people are praised and thanked and, constantly appreciated. But back then, it was not the case.
So, you had to deal with that. But then did you look at it, too, as a possibility of wanting to go into police work eventually, and you could learn it from the military perspective as far as being an MP at first?
No, really. I grew up pretty much hating cops. I had some really bad experiences with them. I got literally, as like a 6 or 7 year old kid, I had an experience with a cop where he beat the crap out of me and threw me in a bush.
Could I ask you what that was about?
It was during, I don't know if you remember the Watts riots.
Oh, my goodness, yes.
Okay. During the Watts riots, I saw those on TV, and I was asking my mom, what's that about? And she said, that's how the people are fighting back against what they see as injustice and whatever. Well, that struck a chord. I was pretty much, anybody and everybody was my enemy as far as an adult, because they were always trying to make me do things I didn't want to do, and then if I didn't do them, I got beat.
Right.
So we went out, and there was a cop that came by and waved at us, and we started throwing rocks at this guy and calling him names, and we were having our own little mini Watts riot.
Sure.
And we took off, and he didn't catch us, but a week later, I guess it was him, came back through our neighborhood, saw me playing by myself, and got out and kicked the crap out of me.
At 6 years old.
Right, 6 or 7. I'm not sure how old exactly. I just
right.
remember the beating. The beating was pretty
vivid.
Yeah, it stuck in my mind. And then he threw me in a bush and got in his car and drove away.
Did you have any other experiences between then and when you went into the military with police that gave you a negative taste?
Not really, no. I pretty much didn't have any contact with cops after that. I avoided them.
Mm-hmm. But when you went into the military, then were you sure that you wanted to do the MP thing, or was that something that just came about?
It really came down to I didn't want to be subjected to authority. I wanted to be the authority figure, and it became an excellent fit for my issues and my personality. It just fit. It made sense to me.
Mm-hmm. And it's very interesting, too, because you were talking about the riots in Watts area. And then, today it just seems like, for example, Connecticut winning the basketball Division I last night, people go right to the streets and they're not afraid to celebrate and even, become somewhat violent and break property and personal property. But it just seems to me that back then and compared to today, that it's easier for people to show negativity and violence toward one another. And for so many years, that wasn't the case. What do you think? Do you believe that, first of all? And what do you think is the reason that people are looking toward violence as a solution to problems?
I'm not really sure that people are consciously, that was then, this is now, and this is how we express it. Like, from my perspective of 30 years of law enforcement, our culture has changed drastically. I remember the very first drive-bys hit our city, and we didn't have laws to deal with drive-bys. They've been going on in California for quite a while, but we just didn't have them. But finally, whatever it is that has swept the country, the need to shoot and kill and attack large groups and, what the military would call and we in police would call target-rich environment, it's way more common. It's almost to the point it's a normal thing instead of not a normal thing. Whereas before, it never happened at all.
True.
Remember, Kent State was like unheard of. Nobody had done anything like Kent State shooting.
I remember.
But now that's normal.
Yeah, that is scary. And it seems that, I don't know if you feel this way, Zach, but the way that the news is reported, it's like you don't really get factual news anymore. You get a spin from the left, from the right, and it's never really the full course of what the news should be. The news cycles seem to be a lot different than they were back in the times of Kent State and the Watts riots.
Yeah, I agree. News has become run by profit rather than being accurate and being held to a standard that it used to be. The news and the media were, I think, really a watchdog, and now everything is just reality TV based. And how many ratings can we get? How many newspapers can we sell? And
it makes you think too. For example, I don't want to get off subject here, but when you're talking about, like, say, the Malaysian aircraft that disappeared, it makes you you wonder, did it actually go down, or is it parking somewhere in a runway getting ready for an attack? It's just the way that the culture is anymore. You just don't know which way to look.
Yeah, exactly. When you look at the facts, I mean, from an outsider's point of view, and I have no idea about the facts, but I would agree that to me would seem like a more likely scenario. Why fly all the way out in the middle of the Indian Ocean when he could have crashed it at any time before then?
So it'll be interesting to see how that pans out. But I want to go back. I want to go back to the 1980s now, and here you are as a military cop, and time, I guess, of nuclear protest, and people were, like you had mentioned, were not pro-military. So difficult environment to grow up in. But yet, what kind of people did you migrate to as far as people that you would look up to?
Pretty much the same people now. The kind of people that I like are the people that are kind of like the outliers, the ones that are independent thinkers, really have their stuff together and are able to see things in a different light.
Well, you talked about the first character was Robert Suggs, and
right.
A very interesting guy. He's, kind of a guy that I probably would have liked to have met just to talk to and to study and to analyze, but he really probably right off the bat was somebody that affected you, first of all, because of his name and the other names you changed, but what was the reason that Robert Suggs will always be Robert Suggs in your life?
Well, Robert was, when I went in, the cops were the bottom of the military file.
Uh-huh.
And Robert really embraced being a cop. Like, he saw being a cop as being a calling, and he really didn't care what anybody else thought about being a cop. He loved the idea. He wanted to be the best at it that he could be, and he started to mentor me. I was interested in it as well, and he was just head and shoulders above everybody I worked with. He ate, lived, and breathed being a cop, and he was excellent, really good at it. He wasn't somebody that was a wannabe. He was somebody that was going to be. He was really exceptional. And he taught me a lot of things, a lot of like hand-to-hand combat and tactical stuff and perspective. And one of the things he taught me was to challenge everything you learn. And if you cannot use it, if it doesn't work for you, get rid of it. Don't just adhere to some concept because everybody else thinks it's great.
More of Community Matters is coming up on News Talk WRAK.
And we're speaking with Zach Fortier, a gentleman that writes crime books that tell it like it is. Hero to Zero is one that we're discussing with Zach here on Community Matters. They're two tales of cops who fell from grace. We'll continue our conversation with Zach Fortier right here on Community Matters.
It's time for Community Matters on News Talk WRAK. Here's your host, Ted Saul.
You had one concept that I really liked, and it followed you wherever you went. But, for example, people can look at things, and then people can see things. And it's almost like he taught you how to see things that people might take for granted.
Right. He had an observation skill, an ability to cut through the crap and see what was behind it, regardless of what it was, whether it was tactics, whether it was an interview, whether it was politics. He just had this kind of innate ability to see through stuff.
And he wanted to make sure that you were committed to what you were going to do. And there's a story, I know that you can tell it a lot better than I could because you were actually there and you were involved in it. But describe to us that feeling that night when he told you to meet him, and there he was, Suggs was there, you were there, and another gentleman, another individual that basically had the same concepts that you had about police work?
Yeah, he was a little different. We weren't the same kind of cop as this other guy, the other unnamed guy. He was more idealistic. I was really more of a rebel. And Suggs basically said, if you want to learn, I want you to show me, how comfortable are you with your searching techniques, because this military search was awful.
You mean to find a weapon?
Right.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
It was so structured, it was just ridiculous. And I was pretty cocky. I said, I can find whatever. And put it on him, and I'll find it. And what I didn't know was he had told the guy, as soon as I find the weapon, to just all-out attack and to not stop until he told him to stop, and basically to beat the hell out of me.
Uh-huh.
As soon as I found a weapon and the fight was on, it was not, kind of a ginger, tender little fight. It was an all-out fight, punching, scratching, everything you could do to try and subdue each other. And we went on for quite a while. This was not what I expected. We were just scrapping, and it came to the point where it was no longer training. It was now personal. We were beating the hell out of each other.
Even after he broke up the fight, he told you to stop. I got that sense that in your mind and in his mind that it wasn't over.
Right. It definitely wasn't over. We were mad. He was, I think, he was quite a bit bigger than I was, and he was more of a rule follower. And I was smaller, but I've always had endurance, and I've always been able to surprise people. I'm not a big guy, but for some reason, endurance has always been a gift. I think he was surprised that I could hold my own with him, and not only hold my own, but I eventually got him into an arm bar because I had some martial arts training as a kid that I never mentioned to anybody. You just don't do. You don't go out and say, I know this. You just don't do it. Then you have to prove it.
There you go. Yeah. So after that, what do you think the moral of that story was? What do you think that Suggs was trying to teach you?
I think the whole point was that you just had to be willing and able and expect to fight. And if you could talk your way out of it, that was great. But you had better realize that no matter what, when you're in this job, you're facing life and death with every contact you have. You can't expect anything to go right. You have to expect it to go wrong. Prepared for it.
Exactly, and that's every day. That's every shift that you show up on. Any individual that you come in contact with, you always have to be aware of that. Your profession is like that, and it takes a very special person to be able to deal with that on a daily basis. Right. So anyway, life went on, and did Suggs have any other type of influence on you throughout the rest of your military career?
He got out, and he was a reserve for the Spokane Police Department. And I had heard that he got hired, and then I heard he hadn't. And pretty much his influenced me throughout my entire career. It really changed how I saw things and how I dealt with everyone in every situation. He had a huge impact on me.
And isn't that amazing when you run into a person like that can have such a positive effect throughout your entire life? You would never think it at the time, but then as the decades go by, it was more and more of even the way that he told you to observe things. I know that you talk about a time, I guess, after your military career, then again, hard to find work. You ended up working in a sheriff's department? Yeah, the sheriff's department back home. I went through the police academy, got hired, and started with the sheriff's department, which was a very awkward fit. I was not a deputy. I was from the city. I had no idea about different types of horses and different types of livestock. And, if a tractor got stolen, I had no idea what to ask about what kind of tractor is it. I didn't know the difference between a front loader and a backhoe and any agricultural equipment. I had no idea. I was just like, what are you people talking about? I don't know any of this stuff. I never even thought about it that way. I know that you had that city background, but then when you get thrown into a rural situation and doing the kind of work you did, I suppose that probably your brothers that you worked with in the sheriff's department looked at you. How did they look at you? Pretty much, I was the odd man out. I mean, these guys had all grown up in rural areas, and, they were farm boy type guys that were interested in law enforcement, but they had a background in agriculture, which was really helpful. Mm-hmm. I had no idea the difference. If you looked at a breed of cow, I couldn't tell you what it was. I had no idea. I just knew it was a cow. Right. They knew exactly what it was, and it was just dumbfounded. I didn't know what to do. But yet, what impressed me is that you went into a situation like that, and you were going to make the best of it no matter what, even if you had narrow-minded thinkers that were in the department with you. And I like the fact that you were writing report. I guess that was before you could actually go into computers and file reports. You were doing it longhand, and you're in this room, and you're looking at these wanted posters. Why don't you continue the story from there? That just, I don't know, it was so fascinating to me how this is going to end up. But jump in and tell us about that person that you saw on the wanted poster. Okay, I was sitting writing in a report room, and had been at it for several hours. It was an aggravated assault, and you have to be very detailed, and my hands hurt, and I got up, and I'm stretching them, and everybody else is working on their reports. And we had a wall where we always posted our wanted posters, and I got up, and I'm looking at the wanted posters, and suddenly I realized I know this face, and I just can't place it. I've always been really good with faces, horrible with names, and I know this face. There's faces like
I went to high school with this guy, or maybe he's one of the guys we work with, and I just can't put it together. But I know this face almost intimately, like this was a close friend or whatever. And I just kept looking at it like, I know this guy. What is this from? And I thought initially that the other guys that were playing a prank on me, because we did that kind of stuff all the time.
Right.
And I took the wanted poster off, and I was walking around with it, looking at it, trying to remember who it was. And so I read it, and this guy's name was Robert Michael Allen. And I didn't know Robert Michael Allen. That didn't ring a bell, and I'm not good with names anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So I bring to the poster, and he killed several people and basically just went on a murder spree.
Just wound up too tight.
He was really mad. Yeah, I get that. I mean, like, he was really mad. I think he killed 4 people that first time.
Mm-hmm.
And then later on ended up killing himself and his girlfriend.
And you knew that you saw that face somewhere in your life.
Right. Reading the wanted poster, get down to his aliases, and this Robert Michael Allen is Robert Suggs, the guy I was in the military with. The guy that had this huge impact on my whole career, and he is now wanted by the FBI for multiple murders. And it just kind of floored me.
And did you go to the sergeant and tell him about it?
Yeah, I was like, I was throwing out expletives here and there, like, holy cow, this guy, I know this guy was in the military, this guy had a huge impact on me. And they're all like, yeah, that explains a lot, you know this murderer and blah, blah, blah. And everybody's sneering and laughing and thinking, I'm just out of my mind. There's no way I'm going to know somebody wanted by the FBI or somebody in the 10 most wanted. And I'm like, no, I really know him. And so the sergeant tried to call my bluff, and he said, you should probably call the FBI. So I said, great, can I use your phone? I'm going to call his bluff back. And he said, sure. So I sat down at his desk and started dialing the number, and he took the phone away from me, and he took the wanted poster away, and he dialed the number and handed it to me. It's like, really? You really think really that skeptical? I talked to the FBI for about 45 minutes about this guy and who he was, and they didn't believe me initially until I mentioned the Spokane Police Department, because that was not on the poster. They knew that, but it wasn't out there. Mm-hmm. And then they took me serious, and then the sergeant took me serious.
And then what happened? What was the end result?
Basically, they all were kind of speechless in the room. I talked to the FBI, and later on I found out that they found him and his girlfriend's body in the desert. He had taken her and killed himself and killed her.
And that is totally an amazing story, because even I'm sure throughout your entire career as a policeman, the things that he taught you were things that you used that probably helped you in situations.
Yeah, big time. He had a huge impact, way more than any instructor or any other mentor in my life as far as police work went. He was the guy that made the biggest difference.
Yeah. And you met...
But he was also a murderer,
Yeah.
He just totally lost it. And it was very much a good lesson for me that anybody, literally anybody, is capable of anything given the right set of circumstances.
And that's the one thing that I enjoyed about reading this particular book called Hero to Zero, where the people that you had actually met and how they influenced your career. We were talking about this guy by the name of James Tucker, and again, not his real name, but I know people like James Tucker. I've met people like him, so I could relate to that story. And, you just act a certain way, a particular way. And I don't know, what was your opinion of James Tucker? Did you find things that you admired about him? Did you find things that you didn't admire about him? Or were you amazed by certain things that he did?
He was incredibly black and white, and very honorable guy. Mm-hmm. Like incredibly. He wouldn't swear, he wouldn't drink. He was just, right is right and wrong is wrong, and he was just a very black and white cop. If you violated the law, you went to jail. There was no in-between. There was no mediation. There was no talking to the person. There was no humanity involved. The law was the law, and this is the way it is. And then he ended up breaking the law in a big way, and it really shocked me.
Yeah. And it just seems like the way that he was reeled in by the woman that he eventually married ended up being his downfall.
Right. Very much a Samson and Delilah type story. She was his Achilles heel. He would have done anything for her, and literally ended up destroying his career and going to prison because of her.
And it's the people that you meet along the way, and the way that you describe what these people were like, and how sometimes they take advantage of certain situations that are presented. I guess a lot of people feel very, very comfortable. They become complacent in what they do, and eventually they slip up, and you probably have known officers that all of a sudden were coming into a large sums of money, were taking expensive vacations, going on trips, and on a policeman's salary trying to figure out, well, why is all this happening? But you know the individual that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you take away from these type of people that you meet?
Well, the whole point of the Hero to Zero is in the law enforcement culture, and why I wrote the book is that, cops are superhuman, and cops are out there to protect everyone, and cops are cut above. And the reality is, the only thing that makes the cop is that, at least from the ones that I know, they wanted to make a difference, but they're still incredibly fragile like everybody else. Still have their weaknesses. They still have their Achilles heel, and it's dealing with their humanity is tough for people to accept. I get a lot of negative comments from that book because people don't want to believe that cops aren't superhuman, but they're not. They're just people that don't want to sit back and deliver mail. They want to make a difference.
More of Community Matters is coming up on News Talk WRAK. It's time for Community Matters on News Talk WRAK. Here's your host, Ted Saul.
That's true. You've had a very interesting life in your police work. Could you give me what you would think would be some of the highlights of your career as a policeman?
Highlights that we're talking negativity.
Yeah.
Some of the worst things I've seen for me personally was really the result of a really brutal rape that even the ER doctors were just astounded at how brutal it was. I came across this girl in a parking lot, basically covered in head to toe in blood and blood clots in her hair, and still profusely bleeding. She had just left her boyfriend's house, and he got high on meth and demanded some kind of sexual favor that she didn't want to do, and so he took a knife to her and cut her up internally, and she finally escaped. That really stuck with me for several days. I was involved in a drive-by where I was in a gang unit, and I had just basically taken this gang apart, taken all their shooters, all their heavy hitters out, and I was talking to the only guy that was left was the leader, and telling him, you need to slow your roll, or I'm coming after you next. And a rival gang came by, shot his daughter, which she was like 2 years old at the time. When they came by, they were talking all kinds of trash, and I was laughing. And then they shot, and the girl dropped in front of me. And I went from laughing at this gang leader's inability to respond to complete rage in about a half a second. It was brutal.
Oh, my goodness.
I wanted to kill him.
Oh, sure.
I was just insanely angry.
Again, as a young man growing up, you were, I guess, obviously there were gangs in the areas where you grew up, but when you actually started to work and in the gang unit, did you feel like comfortable as far as being in that situation and trying to make a change? And, I guess, how do you manage chaos, Zach? That's the question, I guess, when you're in those situations.
Actually, for me, the gang unit was a really good fit. I understood the mentality. I understood that this gang behavior is very much human behavior. Most people just don't recognize it. They don't want to put the face on it that makes it understandable. It is very normal. I mean, in the 50s were high school rumbles between high schools after a football game is gang behavior.
Yeah.
You got the different Indian tribes, like we talked about before, going to war with each other over whatever perceived slight. That's very much gang behavior.
Well, it seems to me that the gang behavior is, again, a separation of the family unit, and an individual wants to be loved and feel loved, but when you don't have that, you probably end up going to a group of people that will offer that to you, and you feel comfortable in that environment?
That is very much what the academics would have you believe, and maybe the social sciences, but I really disagree. I have a kind of an epiphany over what it used to baffle me. There were so many different ideas as to what causes gang behavior, and none of them made sense. Mm-hmm. And I was reading Joseph Campbell's The Power of Myth, and in there he's talking about how important it is for our culture to have an ethos, basically a set of rules that everybody understands.
Right.
But that our culture, and basically worldwide now, has changed into a culture that's determined right and wrong by law, not by cultural heritage. And so that brings chaos into kids' lives. They don't have this sense of where they belong or what they belong to. There's just the law. And a great example he brought up was like for men, or for women, there's kind of an obvious physiological change when they go from child to woman. But for a man, there is not. There's not this ritual change that used to occur in the tribal kind of stuff like with the Indians. And that very much leaves them in a state of chaos, and they feel like they need to be challenged. They need to somehow make this transition from child to man, or from woman, child, female to woman. And it just hit me. It's like that's very much what every single gang member I've ever talked to, when they really get down to nitty-gritty, what it is they're looking for this belonging to a brotherhood or a sisterhood, to be tested in battle, to have their own kind of sense of who they are and what they can accomplish. That they are strong enough, or they are determined enough, or loyal enough. They need to be tested, basically what sports and all that stuff does. But for whatever reason, these particular kids aren't drawn to sports. They need a more intense test.
Okay.
And that's it. They get into this, and it's a very addictive behavior. It's crazy. It's outside the norms. It's very sexual. It's very drug-oriented. It's very violent, and it really pushes them to their extremes. A lot of them do die. The ones that don't die have great war stories. A lot of them grow up. They grow out of it. But even today, I have friends on my Facebook and people that I run my books past that were gang members that I arrested, and we're friends now, and we talk about what it was for them to be in this gang, and it's very much what I just described. It gave them a sense of identity. And even now, as 30 and 40-year-old men, they still strongly identify with their gang membership, much like you'd see someone for the 101st Airborne, or, I'm a Ranger, or whatever.
Yeah.
They very much look back on those times fondly.
You said fondly that they look back at it.
Right. They realize it was wrong. They realize it was destructive, but those are some of the most important times for them in their life. It very much formed a sense of who they were and what they were capable of, that they were capable of protecting themselves and protecting their family and protecting their neighborhood, even though it was outside the law, even though it was criminal. And that's really hard for people to wrap their heads around that have not been in a gang.
Yeah, and it's interesting that they can get out of that. And is it that they just get to the point of where they want to do something else to fill that basket, or they just realize in their mind that it's time to move on and move into another direction, or after maybe spending 10 years in jail realizing that that's it for me?
Well, the ones that I've talked to, very much, they all had pretty significant events happen, life-threatening events that made them realize, but they also survived it. And it's not that they actually get out. They just, in their minds, it's still very much a part of them, but I'm retired. That's what I hear over and over is I'm retired. To me, it equates to, I hate to use the example because it really makes people mad, but it equates to people that go in the military and they spend their time, and some will do 20 years, 30 years, be career, and other people are in and right back out. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the same thing that it is for gang members.
Well, I wanted to ask you, Zach, with the books that you've written, did you ever think that one day you would say, well, I've written all of these books about crime? Did you ever envision that you would have a career in writing?
No, never. Not once, no.
Tell me how all of that evolved. That's just fascinating in itself.
It basically began as a guy who was a reporter in the city I worked in was doing a follow-up on cops that had been involved in shootings and how it had affected them. And he knew that the shootings I had been in had really strongly affected me, and that I had PTSD, and that I had struggled with the after effects of all the stuff that I had gone through. And he said, you should write a book. And we started out writing a book together, and he wanted to go fiction, and I wanted to go nonfiction. So we kind of broke ranks there, and it's been nonfiction ever since.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel you have more books left inside of you to write?
I've got one more that right now is in the works. It's in formatting, and the cover's being done. And that would probably be the last one I write about my career. Mm-hmm. And then I'm working on, believe it or not, a book about the founder of the Crips in Los Angeles. And the original guy that founded it, came up with it, and why it has taken off, and why even today, he died in 1979, but the Crips continue, and they continue to grow, and what it was that he accomplished and how he did it. He's very much, I went into it thinking this guy's going to be somebody I'm going to hate, and I've come out of it thinking we really missed out on an opportunity here with this guy. He's really really a cut above, but he also is a criminal. He's much like Robert Sugg.
Mm-hmm.
He was exceptional at what he did. He at 15 years old, formed the Crips and then basically took over the streets of Los Angeles.
That's incredible. You'd have to have a tremendous personality and leadership skills to pull that one off.
Not only that, it's not just like his leadership. He understood tactics. He understood psychology. He was a very gifted athlete, and he drew sheer force of will and physical ability. And he was also, surprisingly, I found out there were stories of him being compassionate to his enemies. He's a very complex character. It's really a struggle to write.
Did you ever have an opportunity to meet him?
No, I've met a lot of the old gang members that he recruited and that were loyal to him, and even still today as 60, 65, 70-year-old men, they remember him fondly, and they actually tear up talking about his funeral and where they were. They remember it like people talk about John F. Kennedy, where were you when he died, and people from that era can tell you exactly. These kids that were on the street so revered this guy, so respected this guy, they can tell you exactly where they were, when he died, what happened, how they felt, and they actually tear up. And this is 30 years ago.
I know, and believe me, I remember, I was just a young child at the time, but I do remember when Jack Kennedy was killed, where I was, and, it still stays there. So to have that kind of influence, really, you're right, he must have been an amazing individual.
It's very fascinating. It's really not what I expected, but it also probably should have been what I expected, because there's gangs everywhere, but why did this particular ideology, the whole thing of what it is to be a Crip, the whole dress, the whole attitude, the whole violence behind it, why did that take off and continue to grow to this day? What was it that he struck a nerve with? And he definitely struck a nerve in our culture.
Has it reached the maximum as far as evolution, or do you see 10, 15 years down the road gangs having a different type of persona and mentality?
I think it's very much going to be dependent upon where our culture goes. Like I said, we did not have laws for drive-bys. Now we do. We didn't have a need, and our culture changed, and now we have a need. It's not that the guns do the drive-bys. It's that people used to have that ethos that you just didn't do it. It wasn't accepted. It wasn't whether it was legal or illegal. It was just, you were considered a coward if you did a drive-by. Now it's an accepted form to retaliate.
Yeah, even in my lifetime so far, Zach, I really believe I've seen where people just turn to violence as a solution to a problem. There's no longer any type of communication, as if I get mad, I'm going to take your life, and they have no remorse about that, and I just see that continuing.
People, there's books out on, that it's video games and it's this and that, and I really disagree. Our culture has changed. You can't blame it on video games. You can't blame it on the Second Amendment. You can't, it's the people have changed. What they consider right and wrong and acceptable has changed, and that is why the violence has increased. It's not too much money or not enough money or too many guns, or it's, parenting is not happening.
Yeah.
People are being parented by the TV. They're not getting the right set of value system and rules and the sense of who they are. So they go out and they find it any way they can.
Do you look at writing as a therapeutic tool for you?
Yeah, it's helped me a lot. When I first started writing, I couldn't write a paragraph to save my life. I was so really cognitively impaired from all the stuff I'd been through. I couldn't form a consistent, coherent thought to write, and it has very much made it much healthier for me and much easier for me to function.
Well, your writing is incredible, and each book, it just seems to become more and more powerful, and the two that you had just described seem to be even better than the first one, so it's going to be incredible. Zach Fortier, Hero to Zero, Curb Check. I know I have 4 books that I've read, and I'm very, very impressed with your literary skills, and I appreciate you as a person, first of all, for enduring what you've endured, and then to be able to turn around and share it so other people can grow and benefit from it. Do you feel
I appreciate you having me on.
I just want to say thank you, Zach. It was a pleasure to meet you, and I look forward to maybe having another conversation in the near future.
That'd be great. And if I could, I'd just shout out to my wife, Christina, for supporting me, and my publicist, Sally, for getting this interview. She's great.
Yeah, I've had a chance to talk to Sally, and she's very, very thorough. And, she's the kind of a person, if you ever wanted to be in a foxhole, I think you'd want to have her back, because she seems like, she looks out for you, and that's important.
More of Community Matters is coming up on News Talk WRAK.